Welcome to our special New York versus Donald Trump. I'm Ari Melber, and we're going to get into this criminal trial. Defendant Trump reeling from the first week of testimony in New York. And we're covering that on tonight's special. Over the course of this hour, we'll have new reporting on the damning testimony. Experts from law to the sordid world of New York tabloids. We have experts on that, too, believe it or not. We also tonight have a Beat special report on a new separate indictment against a Trump lawyer, Boris Epstein, who first admitted his role in the now indicted elector plot on the Beat. So you'll hear all of that tonight. Now, this week ends with a remarkable contrast from D.C. to New York. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. In Washington, you may have noticed, a Trump-friendly Supreme Court slowed Jack Smith's prosecution and asked a bunch of Trump-friendly questions about all the potential problems with prosecuting a president. If you listened to that oral argument or any of the coverage or read about it, you may have noticed it almost sounded like that kind of trial was a feudal project. While right up the East Coast, an actual trial of an actual former president was going forward, and the Republic did not crumble. It is a contrast that hangs over all of this in America and what we're going to get into tonight. This very first week of the New York trial was orderly and fair, and it seems to undercut the supposed concern of the Trump-appointed justices that hypothetically someday, somehow in the future, trials of presidents are a very bad thing, when they're actually already happening. Now, the first week of this trial shows not only that it is possible, but it also gave us the first real evidence-backed, in-court, binding version of the DA's story. And we put together a brisk ride through what we're learning.
The prosecution in Donald Trump's hush money trial drew the sharp outlines of its case against the former president.
The prosecution started. They laid out a dispassionate, straightforward, very linear, very blunt.
Prosecutors telling the jury of 7 men and 5 women today it was election fraud, pure and simple.
The defense gets right up, and the defense says, the story you just heard isn't true.
You hear the prosecution that lay out a clear roadmap.
You had a reference to the tape recording. That's a terrible tape for Donald Trump.
The defense was like a circus leader.
It has been striking that there's no family. He is by himself.
David Pecker, the CEO of the National Enquirer's publisher, American Media, Inc., giving bombshell testimony.
Pecker tells Cohen, quote, "We committed a campaign violation." Cohen's response, according to Pecker, said he wasn't worried because, quote, Jeff Sessions is the attorney general and Donald Trump has him in his pocket.
David Pecker acknowledged that he did this catch and kill with Karen McDougal for the benefit of the Trump campaign.
The defense spent hours trying to trip him up, catch him in contradictions.
Rona Graff, senior vice president of the Trump Organization and Donald Trump's former longtime executive assistant, described as the gatekeeper, his right hand. Her lawyers are being paid for by Donald Trump.
You heard that word, gatekeeper. The problem for the defendant is these gatekeepers and supposed allies or even friends are talking under oath, and the DA is getting details out of them to bolster the opening argument, where the jury was told the case is about a criminal conspiracy and a cover-up. Tabloid veteran David Pecker has been admitting that. He recounts his dealings with the Trump lawyer turned, of course, star witness Michael Cohen to buy and then bury stories, all in order to protect Trump's campaign. They allege a specific agreement to cook the books to then hide their financial footprints. And the DA told the jury this will also be corroborated with evidence in Trump, the defendant's own words, with receipts showing an illegal conspiracy to undermine the election. Now, Trump's defense rebuts that by saying there isn't even an actual conspiracy charge in this case. That's true. The word conspiracy has a legal meaning and also has a more colloquial meaning. If you ever watched a mafia movie, they're saying, hey, they conspired together. The defense also attacks the whole election theory, that Trump promoted an election by unlawful means. That's the statute. And that would be needed to supersize this misdemeanor of financial fraud into a felony case. So the Trump defense has kind of said, well, maybe the DA is just being alarmist about what amounts to, however dirty, politics as usual. That's how they argue it. Trump's lawyers proclaiming there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. The DA has put up 3 witnesses with testimony this week. Now, the National Enquirer chief we mentioned, David Pecker, was clearly the hottest, unloading these details, dishing on that original sordid meeting that formed this Trump Enquirer alliance which involved a heavy dose of defamation against all sorts of people, including Ted Cruz and his family. Details about how the Inquirer acted as a kind of arm of the campaign, meaning that its so-called media decisions were actually phoned in by Cohen himself, and that the money to silence women came from both the Inquirer and Cohen, who, of course, was reimbursed by Trump. So Playboy model Karen McDougal, as well as Stormy Daniels, they got money from different places, but it all went back, according to the DA, to the original campaign motivation. And Pecker told on Cohen for how he tried to hide their contacts back in the day by using some secret messaging app. How secret is it if we're all hearing about it in court? Obviously didn't work. The DA also showing how the Trump side knew this was wrong, that Pecker got nervous when election regulators started the probe. And Cohen claimed that Trump had Jeff Sessions in his pocket over at DOJ. The DA is arguing that adds to the evidence that Team Trump knew they had criminal exposure from this, and their thinking was not, we didn't do a crime. Their thinking was, oh, our appointees will protect us. We have them in our pocket, you can see. I don't know how if Jeff Sessions would fit in there, but it's an analogy. But Trump's DOJ didn't actually shield Michael Cohen. He was convicted and imprisoned by the very independent SDNY prosecutors, who are federal prosecutors during the Trump era. And by the end of the week, the prosecution turned to Ronna Graff, a Trump employee who appears to be on better terms with him than, say, Cohen. Trump is notoriously frugal, but the defendant, his company, they are still paying for her lawyers. You take this all together, and what you see is a lot more evidence against Trump than reasonable doubt on his behalf. That doesn't mean he's losing this case. We are in the DA's side. The burden is on them. But for a first week, this wasn't exactly a slow rise or a lot of accounting spreadsheets. This was a 2x4 swung repeatedly at Donald Trump as a defendant. And while some of that came from those prosecutors' tough talk in the opening, which I read to you, as we get into this in the special tonight, you got to remember, a lot of that tough talk and incriminating information came from his buddy, tabloid chief David Pecker, who said by the end of his testimony, it's not personal. He still counts Donald Trump as a friend. He's just telling the truth under oath about their campaign crimes. How bad is it? Well, we have two special guests with me right here at the table when we're back in 90 seconds. Welcome back to our special Trump on Trial, New York versus defendant Donald Trump. We are joined by former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and Morgan State University Professor Jason Johnson, both analysts for us. Joyce, I went through some of what we got out of this opening week. I think it's fair to say if you're on the jury, it feels like the DA is up. They're in the lead. I was careful to say it doesn't mean we know the outcome. What do you think they achieved in this first week, and what do they have to worry about?
Sure, it's a great question. You know, if you're the prosecution and you're not up after your first witness, you're in big trouble, right? But the prosecution really did start off, I think, with an unexpected bang. No one knew what to expect out of David Pecker. We learned that he had been cooperating with prosecutors, and he brought Trump straight into the essential conspiracy, the election fraud conspiracy, which is necessary to turn the misdemeanor that's charged here into a felony. Important testimony, he stood up pretty well on testimony and on cross-examination. They did not seem to come after him with a lot. They tried to pick away at his credibility, question some of the key pieces of evidence he came, but he was thoroughly rehabilitated on redirect examination. Prosecution has to be feeling good.
Jason, I don't want to be unkind to the defendant, and he's legally presumed innocent. But his family's not there. The jury can notice that. These are his friends and allies. Some of them have gone so far, they're like Michael Cohen, who's so angry at Trump that it might affect his credibility. Some, as I emphasize, are like Mr. Pecker, who say, yeah, friendly. I mean, the guy's a liar, but we're friendly. I mean, he may have committed campaign crimes. The jury will judge, but that's what I thought we did, but we're friendly. And he's got a whole backstory of, shall we say, really complicated allegations, but we're friendly. If these are the views of his friends, how does that hurt him both in not only the jury, but in the court of public opinion?
Well, this is the thing, Ari. That's why this is such a bad week. Because we can go through all the sort of legalese and jargon, but really the average person is picking up every fifth word. And what they're picking up are things like adult film star, payoff, family isn't there, and falling asleep during the trial. So the outside world is like, okay, this doesn't look good. He doesn't sound alert. We're not seeing anything that gives us the opportunity to think, oh my gosh, Trump is alert. He's paying attention to this. And, you know, look, it's the old song, Friends, how many of us have them, right? But if you heard someone say, this room was filled with people who are supporting Donald Trump, and they leave the room every day, and Melania is there and everything else like that, it gives the outside public the impression, well, these people believe in him, right? So even if he's guilty, you know what? His family is still with him. So the fact that he doesn't have the people who are down with him, that's what the public is picking up, and definitely the jury sees that.
Are you going to tell Joyce the reference you made?
I think she knows that one. That's a pretty classic song.
I don't think she does. No offense.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
This is what I'm going to do, Joyce. I'm going to let you marinate on this one. This is a classic. I'm going to let you marinate. Well, I'll tell you at the end.
Oh, I love that. Look at that. You know, in TV they call that a deep tease. Yeah. It's like when we say, oh, and Joyce is coming back for Boris Epstein breakdown later. That's like a tease. So we'll come back to that.
Yes, we'll.
For the public, we showed this earlier in the week. Again, if we take it all in, front pages in states red and blue.
Yes.
To say nothing of around the world where they don't have a vote, but it's ricocheting. What do you think about the fact that it does take a level 10, a Richter scale? The Supreme Court had to say, oh my God, this is such a big deal. It's a big deal, and it's happening, to remind people of what it is like if Donald Trump is in the center, whether he's in power or the center of the story. People may have forgotten what 2019, 2018, 2017 was like. Does that hurt him, just the feeling of what this is like?
Well, it adds up, Ari, because after a while, people start thinking, well, when is this guy not in court, right? Like, we're thinking he's in court for documents. He's in court for an affair. Is he going to be gone till November? Like, everybody thinks he's going to be in trial the whole time, and that's what makes people worried. But here's the other thing. We talked about this before. I don't carry too much weight in polls, anything this early. But what I can say is this: the number of Americans who have said that if Donald Trump is convicted of anything, that it will affect their vote has stayed steady at like 23 to 25%. So there is a risk here. This is not a situation where just Trump supporters are going to say, you know what, no matter what happens, and Democrats will say, no matter what. There is a quarter of the population, and it tends to be independents, that if he is convicted in something like this, they will say, you know, I just don't think I can do it for this guy. And that is a real consequence of this trial.
I appreciate the precision of your mind. I appreciate that you dropped a second reference, gone till November, Fuji's Wyclef. I'm reminded of when Wyclef said, we all up in the danger zone. The judge hit the hammer. My brother ain't coming home. And that's something he's got to worry about with Trump. Will you now unveil your earlier reference?
No. I'm going to wait. I want this to be teased, and I'm going to have you know this when you come back for your next segment, Joyce.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Because she's going to she's going to integrate it when she comes back.
And here's the thing. People ask sometimes, wait, was this planned? Was this scripted? I didn't know you were going to say it. I didn't know you were going to hold it. So we'll all be in suspense.
Come for the law, stay for the music.
Beautifully put. Joyce, I did want to include you in the legal breakdown here because these Arizona charges are not only a big deal, they involve one of Trump's New York defense advisors, Boris Epstein. So Joyce is going to come right back as we get into that. As these cases collide, we'll show you Boris Epstein. You may remember him. We have that breakdown with Joyce Vance. Trump on trial. This month is actually the first time ever Americans have watched a former president be put on trial. Trump at that defendant's table with his lawyers, including a prominent one, Boris Epstein, a veteran of the Trump White House and campaign, who has become central to Trump's activities since 2020. He was in court with Trump, as you see there, along with the lead defense counsel, 2 days in a row, just as he was at the defense table at that first New York arraignment. His work quarterbacking for Trump comes after he joined and led many different efforts throughout 2020, attacking those election results that showed Trump lost. Now, we've been reporting on those efforts for years, including how, contrary to the initial impression, they involved not just mainly January 6th violence, but a host of other plots over those months, and paperwork, and elector fraud. And we've pressed Epstein on his role in those efforts, as well as his legal views, which, of course, are relevant as he is involved in all this. And now here we are in this extremely busy week. As he is there, you see him working on his phone with the lead counsel, trying to help Trump stay out of a New York prison. But what we can tell you as part of our special, and with all this news, you may have missed it, for the very first time, Epstein joined the ranks of Trump lawyers who need criminal lawyers of their own. Arizona prosecutors indicting him for elector fraud.
Charges for a host of Trump allies.
Boris Epstein continues to have a prominent role in this 2024 campaign.
Rudy Giuliani, Boris Epstein, John Eastman, Mark Meadows, names we've heard in the past, suddenly back in the news.
This is the first time he's been indicted, but also a former Trump aide, who I should note remains to this day one of his closest top advisors.
For Mr. Epstein, this is obviously a big deal, and like anyone else indicted, he's legally presumed innocent. It's also, however, a big deal and a live issue in this New York case. Defendant Trump using Boris as a lawyer there. And in reporting on all these issues, we have interviewed Epstein repeatedly, including when those early subpoenas hit. When you say you will provide evidence, does that mean your intent is to cooperate?
I'm happy to provide evidence of the overwhelming fraud that happened in the 2020 election.
Was your plan to try to force a vote in the House to reverse the election outcome?
I had absolutely no idea that there was going to be any violence whatsoever at the Capitol. There was absolutely a plan and a process for there to be challenges to the Electoral Count votes.
Is that a yes? Is that a yes?
The Electoral Count Act lays out a process to challenge electoral votes. Okay. There was a process that was undertaken.
And you're on record. So we pressed on those issues and questions. Epstein now is indicted along with Giuliani, Meadows, Jenna Ellis, John Eastman, lawyers who had to defend whether or not they became criminals, plus Kenneth Chesebro and Trump himself named among the unindicted co-conspirators in that same Arizona case charging Epstein. The New York Times also says he could be an unnamed co-conspirator in the Jack Smith case. The sixth spot has never been fully identified. The New York Times said that. We have not confirmed that. But we can confirm that Epstein participated in the elector plot because we questioned him on that all the way back then before some of these probes had gone much further. And we elicited a newsworthy admission. This was about 1 year after the January 6th insurrection. It was long before Jack Smith was active. We pressed on how these aides and even lawyers seemed to become directly involved, not in just making arguments or defending things, which they are allowed to do, but in advancing active work that appeared to break the law, which could be indictable. And these leads that we built on, investigators followed them. So here we are in our special right now. I'm going to air that exchange and Epstein ultimately admitting his role in the elector plan, not defending its legality, but saying he did it with Giuliani. And that involved, let's recall, trying to deceive the government with blatantly fraud electors in states that Trump had lost, where the loss had been certified. And we're airing this in its full context, about 90 seconds from that original interview, and you will hear Epstein admit the very elector plan that he's now indicted for this week in Arizona. There's also been reporting about the attempt to seat fraudulent electors. Is that something you ever worked on or would support, for example, in Michigan?
That's so funny. It's not fraudulent electors.
Sure. Chairman Maddock, quote, "We fought to seat the electors. The Trump campaign asked us to do that." Did you ever make calls like that regarding what you're calling these alternate electors?
Yes, I was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors.
So your view, just for the record here, is that you could, as a lawyer to the Trump campaign, seat these electors in states where the process, the state results, as overseen by the independent courts, as approved by the Supreme Court, found that Biden won. You don't see any chance there that that could be against the law, Boris?
The Supreme Court never ruled on the merits.
The cases were so weak, they never reached the merits. It's not like Bush v. Gore, where they had the full case. They didn't even see, and that included many Trump-appointed justices, a reason to even go there.
It was a different makeup. It was a different makeup of the court, and more information is coming out every day out of Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
That if you are aiding and abetting the seating of fraudulent electors or voter fraud, that not only is that potentially against the law, but then you also would lose the lawyer-client privilege under the crime fraud exception for your client, the Trump campaign.
I will tell you that the perpetration of fraud was absolutely done, and it was done by the Democrats. Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani.
There you have it. That was a big deal at the time. Epstein admitting in our interview in the back and forth after we pressed him and showed the results and the examples and the other corroborating evidence that he was in the elector plot. And these are states like Arizona where Trump had lost. So it looks a lot like government fraud. Joyce Vance, as promised, is back with us. I mentioned the nexus to the New York case, and also separately, even if he wasn't involved anymore for Trump, this is another person in the elector plot that now is facing a potential trial, potential conviction. Your thoughts?
You know, it is. I mean, Ari, they might as well mark that tape you just played, Government's Exhibit 1, and send it to prosecutors in Arizona, because that's, in essence, Boris Epstein captured on video talking about the fake electors scheme that he's now charged in Arizona. And when that's added on to some of the other evidence that we've heard about that's publicly known, right? We don't know what prosecutors might have that we're unaware of. Emails trying to convince officials in Arizona that they should come on board for this plan to put in a fake slate of electors to try to tie up the certification of the Electoral College vote. That makes Arizona's case look very solid. Really interesting that Boris Epstein is in court with Donald Trump in New York. Not quite sure what we can make of that. He wasn't there for jury selection, wasn't there for opening statements. He did show up the day after he was indicted in Arizona. Maybe it was planned in advance, but it's certainly worth following.
Yeah, because it again shows how many of these criminal plots intersect. This is someone now indicted for 2020 election crime, trying to defend Trump against a 2016 election crime, as the Supreme Court hears the related coup election crime, and we showed that. I want to put up on the screen just how many of Trump's lawyers and other officials are in trouble. I know it looks like a lot of stamps. We'll start in the lower right, where you have Donald Trump, now an unindicted co-conspirator this week in Arizona. That would be big news any other year about any other president. It goes along with these other indictments he faces. And as you move over on the screen, you see Epstein, unindicted co-conspirator in Georgia, and now indicted this week in Arizona. And as you go up, you have a lot more other familiar names who've frankly gotten more attention because some of them were just indicted a lot earlier in this process. Where do Epstein and these other people fit into accountability? Because as we cover this trial tonight, Joyce, on the one hand, we hear from people saying, well, Donald Trump seems to keep getting away with it. On the other hand, it doesn't look like all these people are getting away with it.
You know, something that I've always understood as a prosecutor is how slowly justice appears to take place. I think that that's been true in this case, maybe more than in anything else I've ever seen. But we are, you know, we're getting to the find out point, right? I mean, Donald Trump is sitting in a cold courtroom, not on the campaign trail in Manhattan. And as these other cases are indicted, and particularly this one in Arizona, you have to wonder, will someone finally break from the herd and truly cooperate against Donald Trump? Boris Epstein has the appearance of someone, we don't know for certain, who was in close communication, who could talk about what Donald Trump was thinking. That's something that Jack Smith would absolutely like to have in the federal prosecution in the District of Columbia when it's permitted to go forward. So it's all intermingled. It's a big spider web.
And we'll leave this on the screen here as I ask you. The other thing I want to mention is a lot of these people, particularly upper left, Clark, Eastman, and Giuliani, and Ellis, and Powell, you can tell I'm doing this out loud, we're all very public. Ellis was also on this program. Others giving press conferences. Epstein, I mentioned. One of their bets was that if you launder this brazenly in public, it might look more normalized and prosecutors won't act. Did that initially work? Is that working now?
It absolutely worked originally. I mean, there were people like you and me, we were two of them, who were stunned, right, and who immediately saw this as an effort to interfere with the election. From way far back, really, from as early as Donald Trump began to say ahead of the election year that he wouldn't necessarily be bound by a vote that he lost. But there was this effort to say it can't be illegal because we're doing it openly and in public. And, you know, that's just not the sort of strategy that you can maintain in the face of good, independent prosecutors. And that's where we are now.
Really interesting. And as you say, some people look and go, it's like every other Rorschach on these issues. Some people go, oh, my God, they admitted it. And then someone else says, well, they said it out loud, so it can't be that bad. And, well, no, that's the trick or the game that some of them are playing some of the time, best as I can tell. And like you, I've spent time dealing with this. But seeing this now reach accountability in Arizona, where, again, Mr. Epstein, like others, is legally presumed innocent, but faces this mountain of evidence, including what he said in public. Yeah, I did it. He doesn't think elector fraud is a problem. Apparently, the prosecutors disagree, and the jury will decide on more than one topic. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Our thanks to Joyce Vance. More revealing testimony in the tabloid side of this. We have that special breakdown and our experts on the history of New York tabloids and how this might play with the seasoned New York City jury. Are in this trial, and we want to take a step back as part of our special right now. Donald Trump grew, thrived, and enriched himself at the altar of PR and New York tabloid media hype. But as the great Jay-Z once said, the same sword that knight you can be the sword that good knights you. And Donald Trump is quite literally fighting for his liberty to avoid a felony conviction and the possible incarceration that could come with that because of, more than anything, the way he did these dirty, unseemly tabloid deals. On Friday, his own former assistant took the stand and testified how she saw Stormy Daniels at that Trump Tower reception area. It was also the tabloid chief, David Pecker, who testified and explained how this whole thing worked to buy and bury negative stories through the tabloids to boost the campaign. Was that your purpose in locking up the story about the playmate to influence the election, prosecutors asked, and he confirmed yes. Pecker also detailing how they worked with Cohen. We're going to show you some of these headlines that are, for the most part, false. A false allegation about then Trump competitor Marco Rubio. Another one I can show you. Let me look at the next one. Infamously going after Ted Cruz. Pecker testifying that story was knowingly manufactured right down to the doctored photo. Now, Trump's defense lawyers pushed back. They tried to say the Inquirer's whole program was just a routine thing they did. In other words, however bad it looks, it was not a Trump campaign thing. It's just how they roll. They brought up Arnold Schwarzenegger and that deal. Pecker said, the agreement I had with Arnold is I'd advise him about stories that were out there. I would acquire them, buy them for a period of time. Defense also highlighting Cohen didn't pay the Inquirer back for the McDougal story. And that's trying to kind of get the jurors to doubt whether this was a Trump campaign thing or maybe just an Inquirer thing. Now, McDougal, who you see on the screen, I spoke to her lawyer back in 2019, Keith Davidson, who told us this.
The affairs happened in 2006. Michael Cohen and I first contacted each other about the matter in 2011. So at a minimum, they knew about me and about Stormy at a minimum in 2011. They knew about it in 2012 and 13 and 14. They knew about it in 2015. They knew about it when Donald Trump declared that he was a candidate for president of the United States.
And the money only comes through at the end. The point there, according to the lawyer at least, and now the DA, the money came because they cared about the campaign and nothing else, and that's why this was not just tabloid business, it was campaign tabloid collusion, if you will. The DA also highlights a text that Davidson, who you just saw, sent to one of the top editors at the Inquirer, something that could be ripped out of a novel. I wonder if we have a novelist around. Looking at the fact that having buried the stories, it helped Donald Trump just like they planned, but they saw that he actually won and said, quote, "What have we done?" We're joined now by presidential historian Michael Beschloss and, as alluded to, the acclaimed American novelist Jay McNerney, who wrote Bright Lights, Big City. If you don't know the book, you might know the screenplay starring the great Michael J. Fox. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Jay, let's start with you. You know your way a little bit around fact, fiction in New York. What do you think about the tabloids coming back to bite Donald this way?
Well, it is ironic. He lived in the tabloids. I'm afraid more than one of us did, but he used the tabloids for his own purposes. He knew very well how they worked in New York. I am happy to say, on behalf of New York tabloids, they weren't quite as blatant as the National Enquirer. But I remember, for instance, when I was tabloid fodder. There was something that I guess I would call it trade and fade, whereby if they had if you got called up and there was a scandalous piece of gossip about you, you could get out of it and you could have it killed if you had a juicier item to trade. So that was, and certainly Donald knew that, and of course he often called up the tabloids as his own publicist, pretending to be his own publicist to spread some wonderful news about himself. But I find it quite extraordinary that the Inquirer actually, in order to not do the job they alleged they were doing, to deliver news to the general public, and it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I hear that Pecker is a very nice guy, but it's extraordinary to me the things that he's admitted. The things that he's admitted were standard National Enquirer practice, at least in those days.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the parts of the trial that's so interesting, and Michael, we'll turn to you. Sometimes people watch these criminal trials and they learn about
how it works is you got a 98% offset, okay? There's big gaps here is when you're selling a whole bunch of electricity back to the utility company.